Hi everybody, welcome to part 2 of how to make a garden box. In this video we're going to cover the irrigation side of it, some of the different options and things you might run into as you work to set up a drip irrigation system. And I'll just tell you kind of my feedback on what I learned. This is the first time I'd worked with the drip irrigation, which is really about that 1/4 inch style tubing, and what I liked and didn't like as far as the irrigation options. So really the first step here then is to figure out how are you going to get water to feed the garden boxes. In my case, I was a little bit lucky in the sense that I had an existing sprinkler head right here that I could tee off of. And really what I mean by tee off is if you dig down, there's going to be a sprinkler feed line. If you go find a T part, which is going to have barbs, and then the other line comes out, which then becomes my feed line underneath this rock, and it kind of comes up here. This is what's going to be the main feed for the irrigation system for the garden boxes. But that T allows me to also have this sprinkler head continue to run. I want to talk for a second about the different types of pipe you might run into, because this is all called 1/2 inch pipe, but it's all kind of different. Here, this thick wall stuff is what is in the ground for my sprinkler heads. We don't use white PVC up here in Michigan because of the freeze thaw. It's really this kind of polyethylene. And I forget if this is called low density or high density, but my point is it's thick. You can't really squeeze it. When you order like drip irrigation tubing, a lot of times you're going to get something that's like this. It's very thin wall. It's easier to work with the barbs. Like these quick connect fittings I'm going to show you in a second really work well with this. So it's okay when you're working with like a lower pressure drip irrigation system, but it just recognize it's not the same thing as 1/2 inch, sprinkler head pipe. So the tees that you work with, when you need to cut this and tee off of it, what you would want to use to cut it, or what I find works really well, is kind of this style of cutter. That makes nice clean cuts on any of this piping. But what I do is with this, is I have a bucket of soapy water handy to dip the barb into on the tee, and you can use clamps if you want. They're kind of optional. I find the barbs always stay in place without clamps, but I do use clamps just because I like the peace of mind. But use a blowtorch, and the flame length is very close to the tip. 3, maybe 4 seconds, quick rotate. You need that pipe to be pliable and kind of warm to get the barb to really seat in there well. If you don't, I just find this thick wall is really hard to get the barbs into. But once the blowtorch method, as long as you're just warming it up and not leaving it on there for 10 seconds to deform the plastic, that would not be good. But 3 seconds you're going to be safe, and it's going to be warm, hot to the touch. Suppose you could use a heat gun too, but that makes connecting barbs with this thick wall stuff a lot easier. So I've got a T coming off my sprinkler head. So my sprinkler head's still working, and that T is running underneath the ground as a line, and you can kind of see it start to come up here. I'm using a 90 degree. And I've transitioned to this thin wall pipe right here. In order to make that transition, I was not able to find a barb that goes from that inner diameter to that inner diameter. Instead, what I had to do was take a barb that was designed for the thick wall pipe. I'll call that the sprinkler pipe, like with the male end. And then, I don't have the part, but imagine a female that screws onto this that was designed for this style pipe, like with a quick connect on it. So again, thick wall sprinkler pipe, not really, I'm not aware of quick connects. They might exist, but typically a traditional barb style with a little heat applied, as opposed to this thin wall stuff, which is really meant for 1/4 inch, lower PSI, lower pressure application, easy to use quick connect fittings. So we made that transition in the pipe inner diameter. I feel like this pipe is thick enough, even though my pressure regulator, I'm going to talk about it, it's this guy right here in a second. I'm running out of the house at higher than 30 PSI. I have not had any issues with this thin wall stuff, although I guess technically I shouldn't start the thin wall stuff until after the pressure regulator. But I don't really anticipate problems because it's a fairly short run. And I'd know if I had a problem because it's really running maybe 3 feet this way to the sprinkler head up and into the pressure regulator. But what I'm using here is quick connects. And so I've got you know, my line from the sprinkler head T coming up, 90-degree quick connect coming up, 90-degree over, and you know, I probably should put a hose clamp on here to keep this more secure against it. But what this is doing is it comes into a quick connect right here, which is a female, which means it's taking the male of this filter. This is the filter right here. And you know, this, you probably really don't need this. I mean, this part costs maybe $10. I figured, what the heck, but this unscrews right here if you ever needed to clean it. And the idea of it is, you know, drip irrigation tubing, that 1/4-inch tubing is smaller, so you know, you want to keep debris out of it. But you know, my water supply from the house or my sprinkler isn't that dirty to begin with. But this part is important. This is the pressure regulation, because out of your house, likely you'll have more than 30 psi, and you want to keep it between, let's say, 25 and 30, because these 1/4-inch tubes that are going to come off of this, you're not going to want to run those at much higher psi than that. But in any case, your flexible 1/2-inch pipe comes to your filter, which then goes to your pressure regulator. And this pressure regulator is a female on this end, and it's designed, this filter was designed, it just screws on. But to get it to connect back to the pipe, what this is going on here, this is a female on this side right here. And it's screwing on to the male end of the pressure regulator, and it's a quick connect on the other side. So this piece right here, oops, if I can get the camera, this piece is like a quick connect piece, a female. And now I've got my pressure stepped down to 30 psi, and I put a shut off right here, which I'll probably never use, but it's there if I need it, and a T right here, because what I have to do is have a T, and this is a quick connect T, not a what I call a traditional barb style T. This going down into the ground has to run over to feed the second box, and I'll repeat that same T process to go to the third box. The other side of the T becomes the feed line for the garden box. And again, a 90, I used a lot of 90s in this, you know, drill in through the back of the garden box. And the main thing is I wanted a trunk line, imagine a 1/2-inch trunk line, to be the main water supply source inside the garden box, but to keep it tucked up just below dirt level and hidden along one edge. And that's really all I need. And when I get to a point, if you remember, if you saw part 1, how these are tiered garden boxes, when these come up and out, like for example here, and I put a shut off on each one even though I don't need it. So I'm coming in, I've got my water supply line, I put a 90 that jogs down about 4 inches and a 90 that comes out after I've drilled holes. And what I terminate in, and this line is running all along the length of that, is just a cap. Now that I took the cap off, but this quick connect barb will screw off. You can screw a cap on here, so you wouldn't run this with the cap off, because otherwise the water would squirt off. But if I can get it, I'll show you. This turns pretty easy. Let's see if I can pull it off with one hand here. Yep, there we go. So these, you know, simple to work with. I like them. I got them online. They weren't super expensive, but that's how this works. Is you can seat these pretty easily, and once you seat it, you twist it, and you're pretty much locked in and good to go with a good connection. Now you've got your main trunk line, and now you got to figure out how you want to use 1/4-inch tubing to irrigate. And there's different styles, and I'll talk just for a minute about some of the different styles I used on this box and what I liked, what I didn't like. In order to make though the connections into this tubing, what you're doing is this one is a little bit more of an expensive one, but it's really easy to use, and it makes a nice clean punch. You can have little handheld ones that like you literally hold it and just punch it in like that. But you're using these barbs that they're easy to push in. The 1/4-inch tubing connects to the other side. If you goof one up, you can buy what's called a stop or goof stop, and it just goes into the hole and it's a plug on the other end. Now with this 1/4-inch tubing, what you can use is like a drip tubing. Some of them have different interval spacing, so you can have like imagine this tubing's got little holes in it, 6-inch spaced, you know, 12-inch, whatever it is. It's just gallons per hour. What I tried on one garden box was drip tubing, meaning it's under the dirt and it's kind of like running you know, sort of back and forth throughout. That was a little bit of a pain just because it's hard to keep it all buried. I think a better option is, you know, just run a strip, another 10 inches, maybe run a strip. So if this is a 3-foot area, you know, maybe run like 3 strips just going across it with what I'm calling drip irrigation, traditional drip irrigation, where it's dripping out of the hose every 6 inches. I wasn't sure if that would give me enough irrigation, and what I ended up doing was then more doing just kind of a random spaghetti, and that's where it got into kind of a pain to keep it buried. But what I found was if you get the non-drip irrigation, just like 1/4 inch line with like no holes in it, you can buy these little micro emitters. It's almost like a little mini sprinkler head. And I found you could do all kinds of drip irrigation, but I like this style in the sense that there's 2 different ones that I bought. One is what I'd call like a, I'm not sure what it's called, like it's like almost, imagine a little stream of water coming out of each of those notches there, so it kind of starbursts out. This guy is called like a vortex emitter. Imagine like an inverted cone of water coming out, and they're very easy to adjust. You just tilt that to adjust your water flow. Actually, out of everything I tried, I like this style the best because it's just a 360 pattern, easy to adjust. 2 of these more than cover this kind of garden box and give it plenty of water. Drip irrigation, the drip line style, I'd say the only advantage of that is if you didn't want any water kind of getting outside the box, you wanted to keep it all under the dirt. What I would do then is I would just make maybe 3 rows of drip irrigation, maybe 4, and just nice, simple, clean lines going across, not trying to run it around all back and forth. So these guys, though, this is probably what I'll go with and convert everything over to eventually. But you know, it's like $1 for one of these sprinkler heads, so they're not super expensive. So you're not talking about a huge investment. So hopefully this made sense about how you set up a drip irrigation system and what you need to do to make it work. It's pretty easy to work with. So good luck with your project, and the irrigation does matter. Last thing I'd say is, you know, before we had this sprinkler head over in the corner feeding the water to our old garden, but stuff has never gotten this big this quickly since we put in the drip irrigation. So it really does make a difference, and I only run it like a minute a day, and that's more than enough. So good luck with your project, and hope it turns out great.